I begin, as all questionable fixations do, with something that appears entirely reasonable. A bicycle, 2 sprockets, a chain stretched between them with just enough defiance to hum when persuaded. Nothing extravagant, nothing especially clever, and yet remove the freewheel, that small mechanical indulgence that allows one to disengage from consequence, and the entire enterprise becomes less about cycling and more about negotiating with a reality at a very specific frequency. Tracklocross, for those who have not yet gently coerced into its orbit, is not simply off-road riding on a fixed gear bike. That would be too tidy, too easily explained. It is rather an agreement between body, machine and terrain, in which none of the parties are allowed to leave the conversation. The chain ensures this. The chain is the clause that cannot be amended. Without the freewheel, there is no coasting, no drifting, no small moments of borrowed inertia in which one might pretend that movement is effortless. Every metre must be authored. Every rotation of the cranks is both a statement and a response. The terrain proposes, gravity insists, and the rider replies, legs turning in a steady, unavoidable syntax. It is here that the obsession begins to take shape, not as a dramatic revelation, but as a slow, persistent noticing. Chain tension is not merely a mechanical condition, it is information. It is the most honest translation of the landscape available to the rider, where a geared system might offer options, soften transitions, or obscure the immediacy of resistance. The fixed drivetrain delivers a single unedited signal. The chain tightens, and in the very tightening, the world becomes legible. A climb does not introduce itself visually. It does not politely appear on the horizon and wait to be interpreted. It arrives through the chain. The tension increases subtly at first, then with growing insistence, until the legs are compelled to acknowledge what the eyes have not yet fully processed. Gravity in this context is not an abstract force but a felt escalation. The chain draws, taut like a line under argument, and the rider is required to respond in kind. There is a peculiar clarity in this exchange. The absence of gears removes a layer of negotiation that in other contexts might be considered essential. There is no searching for the correct ratio, no small tactile decisions about cadence optimization. There is only one question: can you continue? And the answer, which is given not in words but in the continuation or cessation of movement, decision, fatigue. That quiet erosion of attention finds little foothold here. The system is too simple, too direct, too uninterested in deliberation. This simplicity does not diminish the experience, it refines it by reducing the number of variables. It amplifies the significance of those that remain. Chain tension becomes the primary metric through which the environment is understood. It is in a sense a tactile map, one that is continuously updated and impossible to ignore. The rider does not consult it, the rider inhabits it. On uneven ground, this map becomes richly detailed. The drivetrain transmits more than just resistance, it carries the texture of the terrain itself. Hard packed dirt produces a steady, coherent signal, a kind of mechanical consonance. Loose gravel interrupts this with a granular uncertainty, a slight staccato in the otherwise continuous flow. Roots and rocks insert brief, percussive anomalies, small disruptions that require immediate adjustment. The chain, in concert with the frame and the body, becomes a medium through which these variations are communicated with surprising fidelity. Descending introduces a different register. The tension does not disappear, but it changes character. The legs, compelled to match the speed of the wheels, become instruments of modulation. They absorb, regulate, and occasionally resist the acceleration offered by gravity. The chain slackens just enough to suggest possibility, but never enough to permit disengagement. There is no surrender here, only a reconfiguration of effort. Speed is not granted, it is processed. In this constant oscillation between tension and relative release, a rhythm emerges. It is not imposed by the rider but discovered through interaction. The terrain dictates the tempo, the drivetrain translates it, and the body adapts. Over time, this rhythm becomes familiar, almost conversational. One begins to anticipate the way a certain gradient will feel, the way a particular surface will sound through the chain, the way effort will accumulate or dissipate across a given section of trail. This familiarity is not abstract knowledge, it is embodied. It resides in the muscles, in the nervous system, in the subtle calibrations of balance and force that occur. Without conscious instruction, the bike ceases to be an external object and becomes something closer to an extension of perception. The boundary between rider and machine softens, not through dramatic fusion, but through repeated, consistent use. The chain is no longer noticed as a separate entity, it is experienced as a mode of sensing. It is at this point that geography begins to lose its conventional form. Distance as measured in miles or kilometres becomes secondary to the lived sequence of effort. A short, sharp climb can expand into a significant experiential event, while a long, gentle stretch may pass with relative brevity. The unit of measurement that asserts itself is not distance in the abstract, but the cycle of the crankset. Each rotation is a small, complete action, a discrete contribution to forward movement that carries with it the context of its production. One does not simply ride 5 kilometres, one performs a certain number of revolutions under specific conditions of tension, fatigue and terrain. The journey is recorded not on a device but within the body as a layered memory of exertion. The map, if it can still be called that, is written in sensation rather than symbol. This reconfiguration of space has implications beyond the ride itself. It suggests that the tools we use to move through the world are not neutral. They shape in subtle but significant ways how the world is perceived. A geared bicycle offers flexibility, choice and a degree of insulation from immediate conditions. A car extends this insulation further, enclosing the rider in a controlled environment where the terrain is largely abstracted away. The fixed gear, by contrast, removes these layers. It exposes the rider to a more direct, less mediated form of engagement. This exposure can be demanding. It offers little in the way of relief or distraction, yet it also provides a kind of clarity that is difficult to access otherwise. The present moment becomes unavoidable, not through any philosophical imperative, but through mechanical necessity. The pedals continue to turn, and with them attention is drawn back again and again and again to the immediate conditions of movement. There is perhaps a particular affinity here for forms of attention that do not thrive under conditions of excess choice or constant interruption. The fixed system, in its refusal to offer alternatives, creates a stable channel through which focus can flow. The feedback loop between chain, terrain and body is continuous and coherent. It anchors attention not by force but by relevance. Every sensation corresponds to a condition that matters. Every change in tension requires or at least invites a response. In this context, the notion of control becomes less straightforward. The rider is not in complete command of the situation, nor are they entirely subject to it. Instead, there is a shared agency distributed across body, machine and environment. The terrain sets certain parameters, the drivetrain translates these into actionable signals, and the rider responds within the limits of their capacity. The outcome is not predetermined but negotiated. To describe this as a dialogue is not entirely metaphorical. The exchange is structured, responsive and continuous. The ground speaks through resistance and texture, the rider replies through force and cadence, and the chain carries the conversation in both directions. It is an unbroken circuit of communication, one that operates below the level of language but is no less articulate for it. The idea of conquering a trail begins to feel somewhat misplaced. Conquest implies a one-sided imposition, a victory over something external. Tracklocross as an experience through the lens of chain tension suggests something closer to participation. The rider does not dominate the terrain but engages with it, adapting to its demands and in turn influencing the manner in which these demands are met. The participation is not passive, it requires effort, attention and a willingness to remain within the constraints of the system. Yet, it also offers a different kind of satisfaction, one that is less about overcoming and more about aligning. When the cadence matches the gradient, when the tension in the chain feels neither excessive nor insufficient, there is a brief, quiet sense of coherence. The system for a moment feels balanced. It is here, in these small intervals of alignment, that the obsession with chain tension reveals itself most clearly. It is not an obsession with the object itself, but with what makes it perceptible. The chain is the medium through which the otherwise abstract forces of gravity, friction and movement become tangible. In this interface that translates the physics of the world into a form that can be felt, responded to and in some modest way understood. And so the rider continues, not in pursuit of conquest of escape, but in the quiet adherence to the rhythm established by chain and terrain. The pedals turn, the chain tightens and loosens, the ground responds, and somewhere within this continuous exchange, a particular way of knowing takes shape. It is not grand, not revolutionary, but it is precise. It is the knowledge of how effort becomes movement, how resistance becomes information, and how a simple mechanical constraint can reorganise the way space itself is experienced. And this is why your chain matters, not because it is remarkable in itself, but because it refuses to lie. It offers a direct, unembellished account of the relationship between body and the world. It insists quietly but persistently that if one wishes to move, one must feel. And in that instance, it transforms active riding from a means of transport into a form of inquiry, one conducted not in the words or equations, but in steady, rhythmic language of tension.